Hello everyone and welcome to SwitchUp. Now today's video we're going to look at our favourite games of the year on the Switch thus far, as we are officially now halfway through. The only caveat for the list is that the games have to have released on the Switch this year. They can be old games, that doesn't matter, as long as they officially came out for this console in 2023.
Lovely stuff. Okay, if you want to save yourself a bit of money on your eShop credit, then make sure you buy your eShop credit over at switchup.gg, where you'll get 5% back in coins.
So what are our favourite games on the Switch so far this year? Well, let's find out.
First up then, we've got The Pathless, which I reviewed on the channel, and which I believe was on other platforms first. In fact, it may have even been on iOS at one stage. Now, it's a third-person action-adventure that's made by the same people that created Outtro, which was that underwater swimming game.
Yep.
I absolutely loved on Switch, but the problem with it was a bit too much of a non-game, you know? There weren't really objectives, you just kind of swam through.
Yes, yeah, I agree with you, yeah, for sure.
So with this one, they kind of took feedback to heart and decided to create something that was much more, I guess, structured. You could say it's not exactly linear, but it's certainly structured. It has the element that you find in something like Zelda, where you have to go to certain towers, you have to complete puzzle challenges at them, and then it triangulates a monster, and you have this action-based, almost Monster Hunter segment, which I thought was very cool.
Yeah, actually, it was one of those games where when you first said the title, my brain was trying to find the game as you were talking, and yeah, I remember the one you mean now. This did look really interesting. Yeah, I liked the monster battling aspect of it from what I saw. Had quite a nice art style as well, didn't it? It looked quite cartoony to some degree. Yeah, I'm surprised to see on your list, not for any reason other than it's one of those games, I suppose, that goes kind of under the radar, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's made its way to the very back of my list.
Yeah, yeah. Ah, fair play. Okay. Well, my fifth place game then so far is one that's probably better known, to be fair, and that's Advance Wars Reboot Camp. So obviously this takes Advance Wars 1 and 2 and bundles them together, games that were on the Game Boy Advance back in the day, and I had played the first one back then and very much enjoyed it. Oh, I mean, that's an understatement. I loved it actually, but never played the second one, and it was nice to revisit them on the Switch, you know?
There was a lot of comments of people, fans like yourself, that absolutely loved this reboot.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of, people seem to really enjoy it.
They did a good job with it. It's got that same classic turn-based combat, and when I say turn-based, I mean obviously you have your go, you make your moves, very much a strategy game, then the opponent will do the same, and it's that level of strategy that I really enjoy about this one. That you do have particular maps where it does feel like a war of attrition, and I enjoy that. That kind of you start with one tactic in your mind, and that gets blown out of the water sometimes quite literally, and you have to rethink. And I really do like that about this series. And the one thing I will say, and this is very much a personal thing, I don't like the new art style. I've ummed and ahed about it ever since I reviewed this game. Do I like it? And it has some positives. I like the individual animations of the characters, but on the whole, no, I prefer the pixel art, which has just kept it down a tad for me. But aside from that, a great deal of fun.
Next up then, a game that fits into my tastes completely is Mortal Shell. Now, weirdly, I kind of started playing this on Xbox Live Game Pass around the same time that it released on the Switch, and the Switch version was pretty impressive. Now, it's basically a Souls-like experience that has a mechanic whereby when you die, you get ripped out of your, air quotes, mortal shell, and if you can get back to it before taking another hit, you can carry on, which works really nicely. It's very cool. It looks cool as well. There's this like slow-mo effect and the whole world freezes and then you get ripped out of it.
Right. Yeah. I remember seeing you play this one. Yeah. I haven't played it myself. And it's nice when you have a mechanic like that, isn't it? That really does make you rethink the way you play, or bring something new to an age-old way of playing. I'm surprised this year. I mean, this is one of those that shows like the passage of time, isn't it? When you're like, man, I thought this was 2022. Yeah. So how quick the year passes.
It's flown by, hasn't it? We've actually, and we said that across the board, looking at the Switch's life cycle and things like that, this is actually a damn good list. So Mortal Shell, other than the main game mode, which will be very familiar if you played things like Dark Souls, it has another mode which is essentially a roguelite, and it will shuffle the world.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then you go in, so you might walk 5 meters and face like the last boss or something. And it's good, it's really addictive. It gives you the same thing, a bit of permanent progression, and you can kind of go back in. And with the shells as well, you can start out and choose any of the different characters, so that rather than something like Dark Souls where you have to put stats into them, you choose who you want, and they have different weapons which are different speeds and things like that. It's a good game, but it is tough.
Right, my fourth place game then is Octopath Traveler 2. Now this is one that I expected to enjoy because I did like the first one, and I really liked the way they handled the characters this time. Now I didn't get as far into the first one to know whether they did this in that, but with this one I think they did a much better job from what I've seen of the first one of using an ensemble cast. You know, you can play as each character, and then you can play flashback scenes of a new character when you come across them to give you a bit of detail, rather than play as one character for ages, then almost have that kind of jarring motion of having to move on to someone new, you know? I think they did a much better job of that this time. And in terms of the combat itself, I really liked the break system that they used, where you had to break the opponent before you could do any serious damage in battles, you know? Nothing that we haven't seen before, I'm sure, but it just worked very well in this game.
I know you're a massive fan of that 2D HD as well, right?
Yeah, it looks lovely. The thing is, like, I was wondering when the code come in, you know, obviously you had Octopath, you'd had Triangle Strategy, Live Alive used that as well, didn't it? That style. I was like, is it going to start already feeling a bit old hat?
Yeah.
It doesn't. You know, like the things like the reflections on the water, the use of light and shadow, it looks beautiful. You know, fair play to them for finding ways of still refining that art style.
Yeah, I mean, you look at pixel art, right? There are still games that we see that we're like, wow, that looks amazing.
Yep.
But there are little things you can do to give it a bit of nuance and a bit of originality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe all of us at times are maybe guilty of just putting it under the same umbrella. Yeah. It's pixel art, it's this, it's that. Where actually, as you say, you know, you're spot on. Yeah, there are things you can do to really improve it and you know, almost take it above what you'd expect it to be able to look like.
It's funny, isn't it? Because, sorry to carry on the same line, but if you'd never said it about 3D games, would you? You wouldn't go, well, that's 3D. They all look the same.
Yeah, exactly.
You look at Minecraft and then you look at like any other, you know, Tomb Raider or something.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, exactly. I suppose because once you enter that third dimension, you just expect there's more you can do. And I suppose, again, I'm talking about collectively, just people. You think, well, how much can you do on a 2D plane? But there is a lot you can do. It's that time and the skill level, isn't it, you know?
Absolutely. If you're watching this in 2090 and you're playing in 4D,
yeah. What's 2D?
Lovely. Okay. What are we on for? We have Vernal Edge. Now, this is definitely one that I think most people won't have played. So it's almost like a bit of a hidden gem for the list. This was created by, I think it's 1 or 2 people, which is always nice, especially when it's a good game. It's a Metroidvania, and it's something, I don't even like saying Metroidvania anymore because it doesn't really sum up what the game is and how it feels. You know what I mean? It's essentially an open world adventure game. It throws in a few of those mechanics, like having skills that help you progress in different islands. And you travel around on this little airship that kind of reminded me of the old PlayStation days. Someone in the comments was like, oh yeah, there used to be something similar on the DS or something, I don't know. I didn't play it. For me, it felt like an old PlayStation open world section where you got to move around the world map, you know what I mean? And you can choose which island you go to. Obviously, some of them are limited by your own current skill set. There's this quest line to do with your father and whatever, you know? You'll have to go watch the full review. But I just liked how well it was done. And I don't say that like as loosely as it sounds, because we play hundreds of these types of games. The amount of times we say to each other, the controls are floaty, the input latency is not great, the enemies are too difficult, the level design's rubbish. But this has everything just right, and it really had that nice sense of like satisfying progression rather than frustrating. So yeah, and I like the art style. It's not the best I've ever seen, but again, you do kind of cater that to how many people have made it.
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely. And you're right, you know, those sort of things become way more forgivable when the core mechanics are as you want them to be, you know.
Top notch.
Yeah, exactly. You've had some good, interesting games on your list so far. Fair play, fair play. Well, I haven't. I've had really obvious ones, but there you go. My third place one, just to continue that trend, is the Metroid Prime remaster. Now, this kind of came out of the blue, really, didn't it? It was announced, I think it was at a Direct or something like that, and it was available immediately, wasn't it? Digitally. And it was a game I played back in the day on the GameCube. It was a game that I have an interesting history with because I loved Super Metroid, obviously being a 2D Metroidvania. And then this first-person Metroid game came along and blew everyone out of the water. Everyone was amazed by what they'd done with it. And I liked it, really liked it, but I kind of yearned for what we'd lost. I was like, oh, but I really like the 2D one. So going back to it these days where we've had things like Metroid Dread and we've had more 2D games, I think I could appreciate it a bit more.
Yeah.
For what it was back then, you know?
Here's a question.
Yeah.
Bit of a red herring.
Yep.
A 2D Metroid game, is it called a Metroidvania? Because it is Metroid.
It wasn't back then, because it was one of the games that people looked at and thought, actually, this is becoming a new genre.
Yeah.
And Metroid and Castlevania obviously were the name. But these days it's just easier to say the two. It's just so much easier.
It really is.
But you know what I mean? Yeah, it was, as you said about the last game, or it was, you know, it was an open world.
Yeah, exactly. It takes about 15 minutes, doesn't it?
You're right. Yeah, but getting back to Prime, I mean, obviously this remaster, so aside from the game itself, which is great, the level of care that's gone into this, considering it had gone, they hadn't announced it. They'd obviously been working on it in secret, Nintendo, to drop it and it to look as it did, and the improvements that they'd made and the price they ultimately sold it for was pretty impressive.
It's very un-Nintendo, wasn't it?
It was very un-Nintendo. Yeah, you're not wrong. Apart from the element of surprise, that's the one thing about it that was very Nintendo. There are some bits about it that I wish they'd improved further. Being a bit greedy for a minute. I never liked the map system very much in Prime. They went for like the futuristic within your visor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, like 3D walk around map, which I just found a bit confusing. I think they could have maybe just made a few quality of life improvements there, and I would have loved a fast travel system, by this point. But, C'est la vie is still a great game.
Exactly. And like you say, it had remake elements, which was quite surprising.
Yeah.
We just expected full remaster, exactly the same.
Exactly right, yeah.
I think the thing is as well, this kind of answered the whole, the hardware's too weak question.
Yeah.
Because they smashed it. It ran amazingly well. Looked really good. Nintendo, I think, subtly used this as kind of a rebuttal to that argument. Brilliant. Okay. My number 2 for the year then, and this again is another game that's old, is Remnant from the Ashes. Now, I'd never played From the Ashes. I played the first one on the Switch, and again, I appreciated it for what it was. It had an interesting mechanic where you got older each time you died.
Yeah.
And that played into your skill sets and things like that, and how much you could swing that large hammer. But this one took it in a different direction. It really did focus on the co-op and the fast-paced shooting and cover mechanics.
Yeah.
Now, we've spoken about it a lot, so I don't need to say a huge amount, but all there is to say is we've worked through the entire game in co-op.
Yeah.
And each time you play it, there's an element that it refreshes the world. It respins things. So you'll see things in a very different order to other people. Even from my review to when we started our co-op playthrough.
Yeah.
I was very confused. I was like, hang on, I'm supposed to be going this way. And then there was a sewer entrance there, and then you go the other way and it was completely different. That's nice for this style of game, I think, especially if you're playing co-op, because it still has a curated feel, because each of those interconnected segments are hand created, and then obviously you just get a different enemy.
No, I agree with you. There is definitely a place for procedural generation when it's used right.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. I know that's a very, hazy term, but if I use another example of a game that's completely different, being the Zelda game they made, the Crypt of the Necrodancer game that had a Zelda skin, that was exactly the same. Each of the screens was handcrafted.
Yeah.
But then they would piece them together like a puzzle differently. So you were never going to find yourself in a situation where something didn't seem right or seemed like it was too hard because the numbers hadn't fallen right.
Yeah.
It just gave you a different experience every time. And that's a good use of procedural generation.
Absolutely. You've just reminded me of, I don't know why, the Time Splitters 2 level creator. Because you had these pre-made modules, you just clicked them together.
Yeah.
So when you were playing someone's map, you never felt out of depth because you knew what that little segment had.
Exactly. And it, again, to go completely different, but something like Mario Maker, where that's not the case, it's completely up to you as the creator.
Yeah.
You will play levels that are amazing, and you think, how do these people not work for Nintendo?
Yeah.
And then you'll play ones from people that obviously don't quite know how to design levels and don't work. And that's, obviously you would never find that in a game, but that level of procedural generation where things just go a bit skew-if, that's obviously what gets it the bad name.
On that note, if you've got Mario Maker and you haven't played Glen's underwater Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles level, which is brutal, you created one, didn't you?
I did, yeah. It was funny because I tried to create one in the first Mario Maker with Wii U, and you couldn't do it because there was no bomb. You didn't have a bomb. And obviously I was doing the level where you defuse the bombs under the bridge. And in this one, you could lock up a bomb in place and you could set that as the objective, that the level ends when you kill all the enemies.
Oh, no.
So it actually works better, which was great. I'll dig out the code and
stick it in there. I remember because you made this, and then a week later we saw a viral video that had 500,000, and it was the exact same stage.
Oh no.
Illuminati confirmed. Glen was there first.
Here we go. Right, second place then for me is probably everyone else in the world's first place, but it's The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. So there's one game that I've personally enjoyed more this year so far, but that's not to take anything away from this game, which is a fantastic game to play, and a world that I didn't know what they'd do to improve this game. I was one of those, not because I thought the first game was flawless at all, actually. I was one of those that felt it was good, but maybe not to the levels that other people did.
Yeah.
But I just didn't know whether Nintendo would think that, and whether they strive to really make that next step.
Yeah.
But they did, introducing the sky, introducing the whole making system of creating your own, again, talking about, creating things, creating your own weapons and your own ways of solving environmental puzzles was amazing. It was a masterstroke, really.
It was an incredibly good game, in my opinion. And just to say, if you hadn't chosen this, it probably would have been my number one.
Yeah, exactly right. Obviously, when we're picking 10 games, there's no point picking the same game twice. So yeah, it's fair to say that obviously this would have appeared on Mark's list had it not been that I did pick it. But yeah, it's one of those games that I can 100% understand why people are 100, 200, 300 hours into it and more, and will continue to be so, because there's just so much to see and do, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Incredibly good game. Okay, so my number one then, and like I say, if Tears of the Kingdom hadn't been on the list, my number one would be Tears of the Kingdom. Everything else would have been pushed down the bench. But it is what it is. So my number one is very, very recent, and it is the Master Detectives Raincode game that just came out. Now, I'd never played a Danganronpa game before. I didn't know the series. You spoke to me a little bit about it. I've got to be honest, I didn't think I'd enjoy it. I didn't think it was my style at all. You know, too much talking, too much waffling, not enough action, but it's very stylish, and it kind of reminds me of the feeling I had when I played Persona 5.
Right.
Because I hadn't played that series before, and I was like, oh, here we go. Like, I'm going to sit through like hundreds of hours of waffling. And you do.
Yeah.
You really do have to sit through a lot of waffling, but it's really well done. It's like a good long film. You know, where you kind of watched it and you think, well, I've been watching this for 3-4 hours, but I've really been enthralled, you know, from the whole thing. And there's a lot of little details and little characterization that you don't expect. It's the same here. Raincode, from what I understand, potentially isn't as good as some of the Danganronpa games, maybe, but I haven't played them.
No.
But I was instantly interested in the main character.
Yeah.
For me, that's a huge deal. You know, if within the first 10 minutes, I'm like, well, one, he's quite likable. Two, I would feel the same as he does right now. What's going on? And then he's instantly pushed into a very fast-paced, it's almost a tutorial case that you're trying to solve. And then I like that rather than just build this character up to be like amazing, after the first chapter, they knock him right down. I won't say how, but they knock him right down, and he's like, oh. And then everything you thought about him suddenly changes, and then you start to build back up again. So I think it's really good. I know there's been a plethora of different reviews. Some have absolutely loved it, some quite liked it, and then some have really not.
Right.
It's one of those. It's a bit like Marmite, but for my personal tastes, I've really enjoyed it. It did use a labyrinth system that kind of was a bit Persona-like. You know, like you go into the labyrinths of the case, and then it gives a visual representation to aspects of the case.
Okay.
So you'll get to like a door, and weirdly, your companion like slices your throat. Blood goes all over the wall, and it has a question in it. You know what it's like. And then you make a decision, and it will lead you down like the correct way or the incorrect way, with repercussions. I won't talk about. But then there are weird elements, like there's like a mine cart under there, and you're trying to make the choices really quickly before you go down the wrong path. It's just bonkers.
Yeah.
But it works.
It's funny because I never used to be into games such as this. I mean, I'm talking as if this is a visual novel. I don't think it's... No. But I'm assuming it has those elements too.
For sure.
And Danganronpa certainly did. But I never used to be a fan of that sort of game at all. And then there were certain games, one in particular, which was one of the Zero Escape games, which is a series that I'm sure many people will know of. And again, this is an idea of, you know, people wake up having been drugged or not remembering what's happened, locked in somewhere with a bunch of strangers and having to get out.
Right.
I love anything like any story like that. Just instantly, you know, captures me. And I'm not one for story much in games, I'll be honest. If I want a story, I'll watch a film. If I want to play a game, I want to play a game.
Yeah.
Apart from when it comes to visual novels. And I don't know why. I don't know. It's just a mindset change, or I don't know. A lot of the time, I think it's because characters die in these games.
Yeah.
And you do feel genuinely like your decisions matter. Whereas if I play Metal Gear Solid and I play a bunch, then I watch a bunch, it's inconsequential to me other than knowing what's going on. And I think that's the difference for me with these sort of games. You know, when the stakes are high, I'm instantly intrigued, you know?
Yeah, I guess that's it, isn't it? It's a different mindset. Like you say, you sit down to a film, you almost program yourself to want to engage with everything you see in terms of the narrative.
Yeah, and keep your attention.
And keep your attention on that. And it's the same for those, yeah. And previously I've struggled with that, but in these ones, if they get you right, it's like, oh, okay. And in a funny kind of way, maybe that's the one area that things like Zelda don't do so well.
Yeah.
You know? You've got this little guy that doesn't say a word. Like, we obviously know his story. He's done the same thing about 17 times before.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the area that's difficult to connect with as much.
And I think that's the point. Yeah, I think that's a good point, because Nintendo, back in the day when Zelda and Link and whatnot were created, they didn't care for story. It was never about story. It was about people creating their own stories using their characters. It was all about gameplay. And as the world has moved on, and games have become more sophisticated and people expect more of their games, they've started to add lore and things like that. They released a book called The Hyrule Historia that tried to add a timeline to Zelda, a series that never intended to have a timeline because it wasn't about that. It was meant to be like these stories that are told over a campfire and you almost make them up yourself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Using the characters within the game. So yeah, I suppose, just talking about Nintendo for a minute, they've tried to push story into games that maybe they never really wanted to have one.
Yeah.
Whereas these games are 100% based around that story from the start, aren't they?
Yeah, and with Zelda, someone was saying that that's the reason that Link doesn't talk, because you're supposed to be him.
Yeah.
That's kind of difficult if he's already got this backstory. It's just like they're stuck between two ideas almost.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, it's interesting discussion point. Let us know what you think in the comment section. When do you enjoy a story in a game? Is it always, or are there certain types of games where you happily do without it, you know? Anyway, my first pick, isn't it? My first place is a game called Dredge.
Good game.
Yeah, very good game. Very surprised that it's top, I'll be honest. I mean, when I saw it, it immediately grabbed my attention, but I didn't expect to like it as much as I did like it, you know? So this is about this fisherman that winds up in a town. So he has an accident with his boat. He's meant to be starting a new job, and he ends up in this town, and he's given a new boat, and he's told you can stay here, you can work off your debt for the boat and whatnot by doing your job, going out and catching fish. But he's warned not to go out at night, and that's all that you're told, you know. And then obviously you start to do this whole loop of going out, catching the fish, selling them for money, upgrading your boat, etc., etc. And then you will start to venture out at night just because people want more of you, and there's less time in the day, or you know, the thing they want is only available to catch at night, and then things start going awry.
Yeah.
And it's got an amazing, like, Lovecraftian feel to it. Without following so many of the tropes that games that are inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's material usually fall into.
Yeah, it sounds like you could easily have a Hitchcock movie that followed a similar premise.
Yeah.
Like really normal, it's going out on his boat, black and white, and it just gets darker.
Yeah, absolutely, you could indeed. I love the way that this handles its horror. Listen, this is, you know, it's that cosmic horror, which is very hard to get right, because the thing about Lovecraft was, his idea was that you're always more scared by what you don't see.
Yeah.
And it's all about your mind playing the tricks on you and your imagination doing the work for you. And this game does that very, very well. Obviously, it has to show you some bits, but it's not that. It's the way that it messes with you as you're trying to get back to dock. You know, like rocks will appear in front of you, and you'll move out of the way of the rocks, and you'll think, okay, I'll move around and I'll be back, and I'll go as I was going, as the crow flies. And all of a sudden, you've just completely lost all sense of direction, and you're lost at sea.
Yeah.
And I've never felt that in a game before.
It's very difficult to keep your bearings, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, even like you say, you're going to go around, but you do just lose that bearing. Unless you've got a compass there that's pointing you, you're off, mate.
It's very clever. And I remember one time having to dock a neighbouring town. I was just lost. I was like, I've got to get out. It's dark and it's horrible. And then in the morning, when the sun came up, I was literally across the way where I wanted to be. Like, it was a straight line. I couldn't find it, you know? And obviously, I don't want to go into what happens and what you see, because that's spoil the fun. But adding all that as well, it's a very, very intriguing idea and a very well executed game.
Yeah, brilliant that the smaller teams can have the #1 spot as well.
So there you go. That's our top 10 combined, 5 each, of course, for 2023 so far. And then, of course, we'll do one at the end of the year and see how much it's changed.
Absolutely. As we said at the start, if you want to save a bit of money on your eShop credit and support SwitchUp as well, then go to switchup.gg to buy your eShop vouchers, what they're called.
Do let us know your top games of the year so far as well, please. And if you want to tell us why as well, that'd be great. It's nice for us to read them, but it's nice for other people just to get ideas of games they might have never even heard of. A quick thank you to our patrons and our channel members, of course, for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.